The clatter of hooves against hard-packed earth was Zara Westbrook's only companion as the stagecoach rumbled through the vast, unforgiving landscape of Wyoming Territory in 1878. She gripped the letter in her hand so tightly the paper had worn thin at the creases, but it was her anchor to the future. She'd risked everything for a marriage proposal from a cattle rancher in the frontier town of Willow Creek who needed a wife to help build his dreams. Zara smoothed down her travel-worn skirt and glanced at her reflection in the small hand mirror she kept in her reticule. Her face, framed by loose strands of chestnut hair that had escaped her practical bun, looked back at her strong-featured with a determined set to her jaw that her mother had always said would frighten away potential suitors. But Gerald Mitchell, her intended, had only seen the daguerreotype she'd sent, one carefully posed to showcase her in her Sunday best, looking as demure as she could manage. The stagecoach jolted over a particularly deep rut, nearly sending Zara into the lap of the elderly woman across from her. With practiced ease, Zara caught herself, strong hands gripping the leather strap hanging from the ceiling. "My goodness!" the woman exclaimed, adjusting her spectacles. "You have quite the quick reflexes, dear." "Thank you, madam," Zara replied. "Comes from years of working alongside my father in his blacksmith shop." The woman's eyebrows shot up. "A blacksmith's daughter? How unusual." Zara bit her tongue. She'd learned long ago that explaining how she'd taken to the forge after her mother died, or how she could shoe a horse as well as any man, rarely won her admirers. Instead, she simply nodded and turned her attention to the passing landscape. She had practiced being agreeable during the long journey from Boston. Gerald Mitchell wanted a proper wife, and that's exactly what she intended to be. When the stagecoach finally rolled into Willow Creek, the sun was beginning its descent behind the distant mountains. Zara gathered her modest belongings, one trunk containing everything she owned in the world, and stepped down onto the dusty main street. "You must be Miss Westbrook," a stout, red-faced man called out, approaching with a slightly awkward gait. "I'm Gerald Mitchell." Zara recognized him from the small tintype he'd sent along with his letters. He was shorter than she'd imagined, but his broad shoulders and thick mustache gave him a substantial presence. She extended her hand politely. "Mr. Mitchell. It's a pleasure to finally meet you in person." Gerald took her hand, but his smile faltered as his fingers were enveloped in her firm grip. He winced slightly, though he tried to hide it. "You're taller than you appeared in your picture," he commented, his eyes traveling from her face down to her sensible boots and back again. "I stand 5 feet 7 inches, Zara said. "I mentioned it in my letters." Yes, of course," Gerald mumbled, though it was clear he either hadn't paid attention or hadn't realized what that meant in person. "Well, I've arranged for us to dine at the hotel tonight. The minister can see us tomorrow afternoon if that suits." "Perfectly," Zara replied with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Already she sensed his discomfort, but she dismissed it as the natural awkwardness of a first meeting. The dinner was strained. Gerald asked polite questions about her journey, but whenever Zara spoke with enthusiasm or gestured expressively, he seemed to shrink back in his chair. When the waiter delivered their steaks, Zara cut into hers with practiced efficiency. "My father always said there's no sense in playing with your food," she explained, noticing Gerald's wide eyes as she deftly handled her knife. "Indeed," he replied, his voice notably cooler than it had been in his letters. It was when she helped the waiter who stumbled nearby, easily catching the heavy tray before it could crash to the floor, that Gerald's expression truly changed. Something closed off in his face. "You have remarkable strength, Miss Westbrook," he said, and the words weren't a compliment. That night in her hotel room, Zara couldn't sleep. She paced the small space, replaying the dinner in her mind. Perhaps she was imagining things. Perhaps tomorrow, in the light of day, Gerald would see all she had to offer as a wife. But morning brought no relief. Gerald arrived at her hotel looking decidedly uncomfortable, his hat twisted in his hands. "Miss Westbrook," he began, not meeting her eyes. "I feel I must be honest with you." Zara's stomach dropped, but she kept her spine straight. Please do. That is to say, I believe I may have made a mistake. You are not quite what I expected in a wife. In what way? She asked, though she already knew the answer. Gerald fidgeted. A rancher's wife needs to be delicate, feminine, someone who can make a house a home, who needs protection. His eyes finally met hers. You, Miss Westbrook, seem quite capable of protecting yourself. Your manner is too forward, too strong. Each word landed like a physical blow, but Zara refused to show it. I see. I will, of course, pay for your return journey to Boston, Gerald offered, clearly relieved she wasn't causing a scene. That won't be necessary, Zara replied with a dignity that surprised even her. I came west to build a new life, and that's what I intend to do, with or without a husband. Gerald nodded stiffly and left her standing alone in the hotel lobby, the curious eyes of other guests burning into her back. Humiliation washed over her, but beneath it was something else, a familiar, steely resolve. Zara made her way to the hotel desk. I'd like to inquire about employment opportunities in town, she said to the clerk. The young man looked startled. Employment, madam? For a lady? Yes, Zara replied firmly. I'm quite skilled with horses, I can cook, and I worked alongside my father in his blacksmith shop for years. The clerk's eyebrows nearly disappeared into his hairline. That's unusual. So I've been told, Zara replied dryly. Nevertheless, I need to earn my keep. After several uncomfortable moments, the clerk reluctantly mentioned that the livery stable might be looking for help, though he seemed doubtful they'd hire a woman. With her head held high, Zara thanked him and set off down the dusty street. The livery stable was at the edge of town, a large wooden structure with the smell of horses and hay wafting from its open doors. As Zara approached, she heard the distinctive sound of a hammer striking metal, a sound as familiar to her as her own heartbeat. Inside, her eyes took a moment to adjust to the dimness. A tall figure stood at the forge, back turned to her, working a piece of metal with practiced strikes. The muscles in his arms flexed with each movement, and even from behind, Zara could tell he knew what he was doing. Excuse me, she called out over the ringing of metal. The man turned, and Zara found herself looking into the most startlingly blue eyes she'd ever seen. They were set in a face weathered by sun and wind, framed by dark hair that curled slightly at the collar of his shirt. He couldn't have been more than 30, but there was a depth to his gaze that spoke of experiences beyond his years. Can I help you, miss? He asked, setting down his hammer. I hope so, Zara replied, stepping forward with more confidence than she felt. I'm looking for work. The man's eyebrows rose slightly. Work? Yes. I understand the livery might be hiring. He wiped his hands on a rag tucked into his belt. The livery belongs to me. Yates Blackwood's the name. But I'm afraid I don't have any positions for a lady. Zara straightened her shoulders. Mr. Blackwood, I'm not looking for charity or special treatment. I'm a blacksmith's daughter. I've been working with horses and at the forge since I was 12 years old. Yates studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. You're the mail-order bride, aren't you? Gerald Mitchell's intended? Heat rushed to Zara's cheeks. Word travels fast in small towns, I see. That it does, Yates agreed, but there was no mockery in his voice. And what happened with Mitchell? He found me unsuitable, Zara replied, chin tilted defiantly. Too strong, apparently. Not delicate enough for his tastes. To her surprise, a smile tugged at the corner of Yates's mouth. Gerald Mitchell is a fool, he said simply. The unexpected response momentarily robbed Zara of words. She had prepared for pity or dismissal, not this matter-of-fact assessment. Be that as it may, she finally managed. I now find myself in need of employment. I can shoe a horse, mend tack, and I learn quickly. Yates considered her for another long moment. Show me, he said. I beg your pardon? He gestured to the forge. Show me what you can do. That piece there needs shaping. It's going to be part of a wagon wheel rim. Zara hesitated only briefly before setting down her reticule and rolling up her sleeves. The forge was familiar territory, a language she understood when words failed. She picked up the tongs, tested the heat of the metal, and got to work. For several minutes, the only sound was the rhythmic striking of hammer on metal. Zara was acutely aware of Yates watching her, but she focused on the task at hand, letting her muscles remember the patterns her father had taught her. When she finished, she held up the curved piece for inspection. Yates took it from her, examining it closely. His face gave nothing away, but when he finally looked up, there was something like respect in his eyes. You weren't exaggerating, he said. That's fine work. Thank you, Zara replied, suddenly conscious of her rolled-up sleeves and the smudge of soot that had likely found its way onto her face. I can offer you $3 a week to start, Yates said. It's less than I'd pay a man, and that doesn't sit right with me, but it's all I can justify to the folks around here who'll think I've lost my mind hiring a woman blacksmith. $4, Zara countered, surprising herself with her boldness. And a place to stay until I can find proper lodgings. Yates's eyebrows shot up, and then he laughed a deep, genuine sound that transformed his face. You drive a hard bargain, Mississippi. Westbrook. Zara Westbrook. Miss Westbrook. He extended his hand. $3.50, and you can stay in the room above the stable until you find something more suitable. Zara took his hand, matching his firm grip. Deal. And just like that, Zara Westbrook found herself employed at Blackwood's livery and smithy, the mail-order bride-turned-blacksmith's assistant. The room above the stable was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window that overlooked the rolling hills beyond Willow Creek. After settling her trunk in the corner, Zara sat on the edge of the bed, the reality of her situation finally sinking in. She was alone in a strange town, working a man's job, with no prospects for the future she'd imagined. And yet, there was a curious lightness in her chest. For the first time in years, she didn't have to pretend to be something she wasn't. The next morning, Zara rose before dawn, dressed in her most practical skirt and blouse, and tied a sturdy apron around her waist. She pulled her hair back into a tight bun, and made her way down to the stable. Yates was already there, feeding the horses. He looked up as she entered, surprise briefly crossing his features. You're early, he commented. The day doesn't wait for anyone, Zara replied, echoing one of her father's favorite sayings. A hint of a smile touched Yates's lips. No, it doesn't. There's coffee on the stove if you want some. The day passed in a blur of activity. Zara mucked out stalls, helped Yates shoe 3 horses, and mended a broken bridle. When a customer came in, a rancher needing his wagon wheel repaired, Yates introduced her simply as Miss Westbrook, my assistant, with no explanation or apology for her presence. The rancher looked skeptical but said nothing as Zara competently helped Yates with the repair. By the end of the day, her muscles ached pleasantly, and the satisfaction of honest work hummed through her veins. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the stable yard, Yates approached her, wiping his hands on a rag. You did good work today, he said. Better than I expected, truth be told. Thank you, Zara replied, surprised by how much his approval meant to her. You're welcome to join me for supper, Yates offered. Nothing fancy, just beans and biscuits, but it's hot food. Zara hesitated. Dining alone with a man who wasn't her husband or relative wasn't proper, but then again, either was working as a blacksmith. And she was hungry. I'd be grateful, she decided. Yates's quarters were attached to the back of the stable, a simple 2-room cabin with a combined kitchen and living area. It was sparse but tidy, with a few books stacked on a small table and a guitar propped in the corner. You play? Zara asked, nodding toward the instrument as she took a seat at the rough wooden table. When the mood strikes, Yates replied, stirring a pot of beans on the stove. My mother taught me. She was from New Orleans, had music in her blood. And your father? Texas rancher. They were an unlikely pair. He glanced over his shoulder at her. What brought you west as a mail-order bride? Zara's hands twisted in her lap. My father died last winter. The shop went to my cousin. There was no place for me there anymore. I had two choices, find work as a governess or maid, or find a husband. And you chose husband. I chose a fresh start. Zara corrected him. Marriage seemed the most practical path to independence, ironically enough. Yates set a plate of beans and biscuits in front of her. Nothing ironic about it. A woman alone has few options in this world. That's changing slowly, Zara said, thinking of the suffragists she'd heard speak in Boston. But not quickly enough for my situation. They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes. The food was simple but good, the biscuits surprisingly light. You made these? Zara asked, gesturing to her half-eaten biscuit. Yates nodded. Another thing my mother taught me. She said a man should know how to feed himself. A wise woman. She was. A shadow passed over his face. Both my parents died of fever when I was 19. I headed west afterward, worked ranches in Texas and Colorado before settling here 5 years ago. I'm sorry about your parents, Zara said softly. Yates met her eyes. And I'm sorry about your father. The simple acknowledgement of her loss touched Zara deeply. Gerald had barely asked about her family during their brief acquaintance. After supper, Zara insisted on washing the dishes despite Yates's protests. As she worked, he picked up his guitar and began to play a melancholy tune that seemed to capture the vastness of the Wyoming landscape. Zara found herself humming along, the tension of the past days melting away with each note. When she finished the dishes, she turned to find Yates watching her, his expression thoughtful. You have a nice voice, he said. Thank you, she replied, suddenly self-conscious. I should retire. Morning comes early. Yates nodded, setting aside his guitar. That it does. Good night, Miss Westbrook. Good night, Mr. Blackwood. As Zara climbed the stairs to her small room, she realized she felt more at ease in this rough stable with a man she barely knew than she had in Gerald Mitchell's proper company. The thought was as unsettling as it was comforting. The days fell into a pattern. Zara would rise with the sun, work alongside Yates through the day, and often share a simple supper with him in the evening. Sometimes he would play his guitar, sometimes they would just talk about books they'd read or places they'd been. Word spread quickly through Willow Creek about the female blacksmith. Some people came to the livery out of curiosity, others to scoff. A few of the town women would cross the street rather than pass too close to the unnatural Miss Westbrook, but Zara found she cared less with each passing day. What did matter was the growing respect she saw in Yates's eyes when she mastered a new technique, or handled a difficult horse. He was a patient teacher, never condescending, treating her as a capable apprentice rather than a curiosity, or a burden. One afternoon, about 3 weeks after Zara's arrival in Willow Creek, she was working alone at the forge while Yates delivered a repaired plow to a farm outside town. The bell above the stable door jangled, and she looked up to see Gerald Mitchell standing in the entrance, his expression a mixture of shock and disapproval. Miss Westbrook, he said stiffly. I hardly expected to find you like this. Zara set down her hammer, acutely aware of the soot on her apron and the wisps of hair escaping her bun. Mr. Mitchell, what can I do for you? Gerald shifted uncomfortably. I came to inquire about having my buggy wheel repaired, but I see Mr. Blackwood is not here. He'll return shortly, Zara replied. But I can examine the wheel if you'd like. I'm fully capable. Gerald's mustache twitched. No, that won't be necessary. I'll return when Mr. Blackwood is available. He turned to leave but paused. Miss Westbrook, I feel I should warn you. Your situation here is causing talk in town. It's most inappropriate for a single woman to be living and working in such close quarters with an unmarried man. Zara's cheeks burned, but she kept her voice steady. My reputation is my own concern, Mr. Mitchell. You relinquished any right to advise me when you rejected our arrangement. I was trying to spare both of us an unsuitable match, Gerald insisted. But this is beyond the pale. No decent man will marry you after this. Then it's fortunate I'm not currently seeking a husband, Zara retorted, her patience wearing thin. Good day, Mr. Mitchell. After he left, Zara's hands trembled so badly she had to set aside her work. As much as she wanted to dismiss Gerald's words, they had struck a nerve. She had come west seeking security and a future, and now she found herself in a precarious position with no clear path forward. When Yates returned, he found her sitting on a hay bale, lost in thought. Everything all right? He asked, leading his horse into a stall. Zara hesitated, then decided honesty was best. Gerald Mitchell came by. He expressed concern about my living and working arrangements. Yates's jaw tightened. Mitchell needs to mind his own business. He's not entirely wrong, Zara admitted reluctantly. My situation here is unusual. People are talking. People always talk, Yates said dismissively. Question is, do you care what they say? I shouldn't, Zara replied. But I came here hoping to build a respectable life. I don't want to be seen as what? Yates prompted when she trailed off. Zara met his gaze directly. As your kept woman. Yates's eyes widened, and then a flush crept up his neck. No one who's seen you work would think that. You'd be surprised what people choose to think, especially about a woman who doesn't fit their expectations. Yates ran a hand through his hair, leaving it more disheveled than usual. What do you want to do? I don't want to lose a good assistant, but I understand if you feel you need to find other arrangements. The fact that he immediately respected her agency, without trying to tell her what to do, only confirmed what Zara already knew. Yates Blackwood was a rare kind of man. I don't want to leave, she said firmly. But perhaps I should find other lodgings in town. It would be more proper. Yates nodded slowly. Mrs. Hendricks at the boarding house is strict but fair. I could put in a word for you. I'd appreciate that, Zara said, relieved he understood. The following day, Zara moved her few belongings to the boarding house on the edge of town. Mrs. Hendricks, a stern widow with sharp eyes and an even sharper tongue, made it clear that she ran a respectable establishment and expected her boarders to behave accordingly. I understand you're working at Blackwood's livery, she said as she showed Zara to a small room on the second floor. Yes, madam, Zara replied. Unusual occupation for a lady, Mrs. Hendricks commented, her tone neutral. I'm aware, Zara said, bracing for disapproval. To her surprise, Mrs. Hendricks's thin lips curved into what might have been a smile. My late husband was a blacksmith. Hardest working man I ever knew. Dinner's at 6 sharp. Don't be late. With that, she left Zara alone in her new room, slightly bewildered but relieved. The new arrangement meant Zara had to walk to and from the livery each day, but the exercise was pleasant, and it gave her time to think. She found herself looking forward to seeing Yates each morning, his quiet, "Good morning, Miss Westbrook," becoming the highlight of her day. Spring was giving way to summer, the Wyoming landscape bursting with wildflowers and the promise of long, golden days. Zara had been in Willow Creek for nearly 2 months, and despite the occasional disapproving glance or whispered comment, she was beginning to feel at home. Her skill at the forge improved daily under Yates's tutelage. He was a patient teacher, showing her techniques her father had never taught her, respecting her strength while helping her refine her precision. One afternoon, as they worked side by side repairing a set of wagon wheel rims, Yates suddenly asked, "Would you like to come to the town dance on Saturday?" Zara nearly dropped her hammer. The dance? Yates kept his eyes on his work, but there was a tension in his shoulders that hadn't been there before. As friends, of course. I thought you might enjoy meeting more people in town. Some who aren't as narrow-minded as Mitchell and his crowd. I'd like that, Zara said, surprised by how much she meant it. Yates glanced up, a rare full smile transforming his usually serious face. Good. I'll call for you at 7. The next few days passed in a blur of anticipation and anxiety. Zara took stock of her limited wardrobe and realized with dismay that she had nothing suitable for a dance. Her practical work clothes and the modest traveling dress she'd worn to meet Gerald were hardly appropriate for a social occasion. In desperation, she approached Mrs. Hendricks after dinner on Thursday evening. "Mrs. Hendricks, might I ask for your advice?" Zara began hesitantly. The older woman looked up from her mending. "Of course, dear. Mr. Blackwood has invited me to the town dance on Saturday, and I find myself without an appropriate dress for the occasion." Mrs. Hendricks's eyebrows rose slightly. "Has he indeed? As your employer or as something more?" "As a friend," Zara said quickly, heat rising to her cheeks. Mrs. Hendricks replied, a knowing look in her eyes. "Well, as it happens, I was quite accomplished with a needle in my younger days. We might be able to refashion one of your existing dresses with a few adjustments." The next evening, Zara found herself standing still as Mrs. Hendricks pinned and tucked her traveling dress, transforming the plain garment with scraps of lace from her own collection and a length of pale blue ribbon that brought out the green in Zara's eyes. "There," Mrs. Hendricks said, stepping back to admire her work. "It's not the height of fashion, but it will do nicely for a country dance." Zara stared at her reflection in Mrs. Hendricks's mirror, hardly recognizing herself. The dress, once serviceable and unremarkable, now had a certain elegance. The neckline was modestly scooped, edged with delicate lace, and the ribbon defined her waist in a way her usual clothes never did. "It's beautiful," Zara breathed. "I don't know how to thank you." Mrs. Hendricks patted her hand. "You can thank me by enjoying yourself. It's good to see you stepping out. A young woman shouldn't spend all her time working, no matter how much she enjoys it." Saturday evening arrived clear and warm. Zara took extra care with her appearance, washing her hair and arranging it in a softer style than her usual practical bun. A few curls framed her face, and she had pinched her cheeks for color. When Mrs. Hendricks announced that Mr. Blackwood was waiting downstairs, Zara took a deep breath and descended the stairs, suddenly shy. Yates stood in the parlor, hat in hand, dressed in clean dark trousers and a crisp white shirt. His hair was combed back from his forehead, and he trimmed his stubble. He looked up as Zara entered, and the expression that crossed his face made her heart skip a beat. "Miss Westbrook," he said, his voice slightly hoarse. "You look lovely." "Thank you," Zara replied softly. "You clean up quite well yourself, Mr. Blackwood." A hint of color touched Yates's cheekbones. "Shall we?" he asked, offering his arm. The town hall was transformed for the occasion, with lanterns strung across the ceiling and wild flowers arranged in mason jars on tables around the perimeter. A small band played lively tunes at one end, and couples were already dancing when Yates and Zara arrived. Their entrance caused a brief lull in conversation, curious eyes following them as Yates led Zara to a seat near the punch bowl. She spotted Gerald Mitchell across the room, his arm around a petite blonde woman who must be his new intended. He pointedly looked away when he caught Zara's eye. "Would you care for some punch?" Yates asked, seemingly oblivious to the stares. "Yes, please," Zara replied, wishing her hands would stop trembling. As Yates moved away to fetch their drinks, a tall woman with kind eyes and silver-streaked dark hair approached Zara. "You must be Miss Westbrook," she said with a warm smile. "I'm Clara Bennett. My husband and I run the general store. It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Bennett," Zara replied, relieved by the friendly overture. "I've been meaning to stop by the livery and introduce myself." Clara continued. "My husband speaks highly of your work. Says you saved our delivery wagon when the axle broke last week." "It was a simple repair," Zara said modestly. Clara laughed. "Simple for someone with skill. The way Daniel tells it, you spotted a flaw in the metal that Yates himself missed." Yates returned with 2 cups of punch in time to hear this last comment. She did indeed, he confirmed, handing Zara her drink. Miss Westbrook has an excellent eye. And steady hands? Clara added. We need more women like you in Willow Creek, Miss Westbrook. Too many men out here think a woman's only use is cooking and bearing children. Clara, don't frighten Miss Westbrook with your progressive ideas. A deep voice chuckled. A broad-shouldered man with a salt and pepper beard joined them, placing a hand on Clara's waist. Daniel Bennett, miss. Pleasure to meet you. The Bennetts chatted with them amiably for several minutes before moving on to greet other guests. Zara found herself gradually relaxing as Yates introduced her to more of the townspeople: the schoolteacher, the barber, the banker, and his wife. Some were merely polite, others genuinely welcoming, but none were overtly hostile. See? Not everyone in Willow Creek is like Mitchell, Yates said as they watched the dancers. I'm beginning to realize that, Zara admitted. The band struck up a waltz, and Yates turned to her with an unexpected look of uncertainty. Would you care to dance, Miss Westbrook? Zara hesitated. She knew the basic steps her father had insisted she learn despite her mother's death, but it had been years since she'd danced with anyone. I'm afraid I'm rather out of practice, she warned. As am I, Yates replied with a small smile. We can be clumsy together. Taking a deep breath, Zara placed her hand in his. Very well, Mr. Blackwood. I accept. Yates led her onto the dance floor, placing one hand respectfully at her waist while the other held hers. As they began to move with the music, Zara was acutely aware of his nearness, the clean scent of soap and leather that clung to him, the surprising grace with which he guided her through the steps. You dance very well for someone out of practice, she commented. My mother insisted, Yates replied, his blue eyes warm with amusement. Said no son of hers would shame her on a dance floor. She sounds like a remarkable woman. She was. His expression softened with memory. She would have liked you, I think. She had no patience for pretense. A trait we share, Zara agreed. They fell silent, moving together with increasing confidence as the music swelled around them. For those few minutes, Zara forgot about the curious stares and whispers. There was only the music, the warmth of Yates's hand at her waist, and the curious lightness in her chest whenever their eyes met. When the dance ended, Yates led her back to their seats, his hand lingering on hers a moment longer than strictly necessary. The evening continued pleasantly, with more dancing, more punch, and more introductions. By the time Yates escorted her back to the boarding house, Zara felt a sense of belonging she hadn't experienced since her father's death. Thank you for inviting me, she said as they stood on the porch, the night air cool against her flushed cheeks. Thank you for accepting, Yates replied. He hesitated, then added, I enjoyed your company very much, Miss Westbrook. As did I, Mr. Blackwood. Zara paused, gathering her courage. Perhaps you might call me Zara? After all, we work together every day. A slow smile spread across Yates's face. I'd like that. And you must call me Yates. Yates, she repeated, liking the way his name felt on her lips. Good night, then. Good night, Zara, he replied softly. As she climbed the stairs to her room, Zara's heart was pounding in a way that had nothing to do with the exertion of dancing. The next morning at church, Zara was surprised to find herself greeted warmly by Clara Bennett and several other women she'd met at the dance. She took a seat next to Mrs. Hendricks, conscious of the glances sent her way, some curious, some friendly, and a few decidedly disapproving. Gerald Mitchell and his new intended sat across the aisle, the young woman casting frequent glances at Zara. After the service, as people mingled outside, the woman approached her hesitantly. Miss Westbrook? I'm Louisa Parker. Zara nodded politely. Miss Parker. It's nice to meet you. Louisa twisted her handkerchief nervously. I wanted to. That is. I hope there are no hard feelings. About Gerald. None at all, Zara assured her, meaning it. I wish you both happiness. Relief washed over Louisa's delicate features. Thank you. And if I may say so, you and Mr. Blackwood made a handsome couple at the dance last night. Before Zara could correct her misunderstanding, Louisa hurried back to Gerald's side, leaving Zara flustered and uncertain. Was that how people saw her and Yates? As a couple? The thought followed her through the day and into the work week. She found herself hyper-aware of Yates's presence, noticing things she'd previously overlooked: the way his hands moved with such precision, the rare but transformative nature of his smile, the quiet strength that seemed to radiate from him. On Wednesday afternoon, disaster struck. Zara was working on a delicate piece of metalwork when a spark flew into a pile of dry hay that hadn't been properly cleared away. Within seconds, flames were licking up the stable wall. "Fire!" she shouted, dropping her tools and rushing for the water bucket. Yates, who had been in the back with a customer, came running. Together they fought the flames, Zara working alongside him with desperate efficiency. The customer helped as well, forming a bucket brigade with several townspeople who spotted the smoke. By the time the fire was extinguished, Zara's dress was ruined, her arms were smudged with soot, and her hair had come completely undone from its pins. But the stable was saved, with only one wall and part of the hayloft damaged. "That was quick thinking," Yates said, his face streaked with sweat and ash. "If you hadn't spotted it so fast, we might have lost the whole stable." "It was my fault," Zara admitted, fighting back tears of shock and frustration. "I should have checked the area was clear before lighting the forge." Yates shook his head firmly. "We both should have. The responsibility is as much mine as yours." The customer, a rancher named Porter, clapped Yates on the shoulder. "You've got yourself a fine partner there, Blackwood. Not many women or men, for that matter, would have kept their heads like that." After the excitement died down and the onlookers dispersed, Zara and Yates surveyed the damage. It was substantial but reparable. "We'll need to replace these support beams," Yates said, pointing to the charred wood, "and rebuild this section of wall." "I can help," Zara offered immediately. "I've done carpentry work before." Yates looked at her for a long moment, something unreadable in his expression. "You're remarkable, do you know that?" Zara blinked, taken aback by the unexpected praise. "I'm just doing what needs to be done." "That's exactly what makes you remarkable," Yates said quietly. "You don't shrink from challenges. You face them head-on, with strength and grace." The intensity in his blue eyes made Zara's breath catch. "Most men seem to find that threatening rather than admirable," she said, thinking of Gerald and countless others who had been intimidated by her capabilities. "Most men are fools," Yates replied simply. The moment hung between them, charged with something Zara couldn't quite name. Then Yates cleared his throat and turned back to the damaged wall. "We should get started on the repairs tomorrow," he said, his voice returning to its usual practical tone. "I'll order the lumber first thing." The next few days were filled with hard work as they repaired the fire damage. Word of the incident and Zara's role in saving the stable spread through town, and she was surprised to find herself receiving approving nods from people who had previously avoided her. Clara Bennett stopped by with a basket of food for the workers, and even Mrs. Hendricks made a point of telling Zara she was proud of her quick action. It seemed that proving her worth in a crisis had done more to win over the townspeople than any amount of proper behavior could have. As summer progressed, the livery thrived. Yates began openly advertising Blackwood and Westbrook, blacksmiths and farriers, much to Zara's surprised delight. Her wages increased to match her growing responsibilities, and she found herself dreaming of perhaps one day being a true partner in the business. But alongside her professional satisfaction grew a more complicated feeling. Each day spent working alongside Yates, sharing meals, exchanging ideas, and occasionally playing music in the evenings, deepened her regard for him. She found herself noticing the way sunlight caught in his dark hair, the deep timbre of his laugh, the gentle way he handled even the most difficult horses. It was more than admiration or friendship, though Zara was reluctant to name it even in her private thoughts. Whatever it was, she suspected it was one-sided. Yates treated her with unfailing respect and warmth, but never overstepped the boundaries of their working relationship. Until the day of the thunderstorm. It began as a typical August afternoon, hot and still, the air heavy with impending rain. Zara and Yates were finishing up the day's work when the first rumble of thunder shook the stable. "That sounds close," Zara commented, glancing toward the open doors where darkness was gathering rapidly. "Too close," Yates agreed, setting down his tools. "We should secure everything before it hits." They worked quickly, bringing in the horses from the paddock, closing shutters, and checking that nothing flammable was near the forge. By the time they finished, the storm had broken in earnest, rain lashing against the stable in horizontal sheets, while lightning split the sky. "You can't walk back to the boarding house in this," Yates said, raising his voice to be heard over the downpour. "You'd be soaked through in seconds." "I can wait it out," Zara replied, though a particularly vicious crack of thunder made her jump. Yates eyed her thoughtfully. "You don't like storms." It wasn't a question. Zara wrapped her arms around herself, embarrassed by her reaction. "They unnerve me a bit," she admitted. "My mother died during a thunderstorm. I was 8. Ever since then." "You don't need to explain," Yates said gently. "Come on. You can wait in my quarters where it's warmer." The cabin attached to the stable was cozy, the small stove giving off welcome heat against the sudden chill brought by the storm. Yates lit a lamp and gestured for Zara to take a seat at the table. "I'll make some coffee," he offered. Zara watched as he moved efficiently around the small kitchen, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the lamplight. This man who worked with such strength and precision all day could also be surprisingly gentle in his movements. The coffee was hot and strong, exactly what Zara needed to steady her nerves as the storm raged outside. They sat at the table, the comfortable silence between them broken only by the occasional rumble of thunder. "Tell me about your mother," Yates said after a while. "If you don't mind talking about her." Zara cupped her hands around her mug, drawing comfort from its warmth. "She was beautiful. Not in the conventional way, but she had a liveliness about her that drew people in. She loved to sing. She'd sing while doing laundry, while cooking, while tucking me in at night." "That's where you get it from," Yates said with a small smile. "I've heard you humming at the forge." Zara blushed. "I didn't realize I was doing it out loud." "It's nice," Yates assured her. "Reminds me of my mother, actually. She used to sing Creole lullabies when I was small." The storm showed no signs of abating. Rain drummed relentlessly on the roof, and wind whistled through the small gaps in the cabin's construction. As evening deepened into night, it became clear that Zara wouldn't be able to return to the boarding house. "You can take my bed," Yates offered. "I'll sleep out here by the stove." "I couldn't put you out of your bed," Zara protested. "It's no trouble. I've slept in far worse places." A particularly violent thunderclap made the cabin shudder, and Zara couldn't quite suppress a small sound of distress. Without thinking, Yates moved to her side, his hand covering hers on the table. "It's all right," he said softly. "You're safe here." The simple touch of his hand on hers sent warmth coursing through Zara that had nothing to do with the stove or the coffee. She looked up, meeting his eyes in the lamplight, and what she saw there made her breath catch. Concern, yes, but something else too, something that mirrored the feelings she'd been trying to ignore for weeks. "Yates," she whispered, his name a question and an answer all at once. He moved slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, his free hand coming up to gently brush a strand of hair from her face. "Zara," he replied, her name like a prayer on his lips. The storm forgotten, Zara leaned into his touch, her eyes fluttering closed as his fingers traced the line of her jaw. When she opened them again, his face was closer, his eyes asking a silent question. Her answer was to close the distance between them, pressing her lips to his in a kiss that started hesitant but quickly deepened as Yates's arms came around her, drawing her closer. For someone so strong, his touch was incredibly gentle, as if she were something precious that might break. It was Zara who threaded her fingers through his hair, Zara who deepened the kiss, showing him with actions what she couldn't yet say with words, that she wanted this, wanted him, had perhaps been wanting him since that first day in the stable. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Yates rested his forehead against hers. "I've been wanting to do that for weeks," he admitted. "Why didn't you?" Zara asked, her hands still linked behind his neck. "I didn't want to presume. You came here looking for a husband, found rejection instead, and ended up working for me. I didn't want you to think I was taking advantage. Is that what you think this is?" Zara pulled back slightly to see his face. "Me being grateful for employment?" Yates shook his head. "No. But I wanted to be sure you knew that too." The honesty in his eyes, the respect evident in every word, only confirmed what Zara already knew: this man was unlike any she had ever met. "I know exactly what this is," she said softly. "This is me falling in love with a man who sees my strength as an asset, not a liability. A man who has never once asked me to be less than I am." Yates's eyes widened at her bold declaration, and then his face broke into that rare, transformative smile that never failed to make her heart race. "And this is me loving a woman who reminds me every day what courage looks like. Who makes me want to be worthy of her strength." The storm continued to rage outside, but within the small cabin, Zara Westbrook found a peace she hadn't known she was seeking. In Yates Blackwood's arms, she wasn't too strong or too capable or too anything, she was simply, perfectly herself. Morning brought clear skies and the realization that Zara's absence from the boarding house would not have gone unnoticed. Though nothing improper had occurred beyond that one kiss, Yates had indeed slept by the stove while Zara took his bed. The damage to her reputation could be significant. "I should get back before breakfast," Zara said, pinning up her hair as best she could without a mirror. "I'll walk with you," Yates offered. "And I'll speak with Mrs. Hendricks, explain about the storm." Zara shook her head. "That might make things worse. Better for me to face her alone." "Zara," Yates caught her hand as she reached for the door. "About last night." "Yes?" she prompted when he hesitated. "I meant what I said," he told her, his blue eyes serious. "Every word." Warmth bloomed in Zara's chest. "As did I? Then there's something I need to ask you," Yates continued. "But not yet. I need to make arrangements first." Curiosity piqued, Zara raised an eyebrow. "What kind of arrangements?" "You'll see," Yates replied with an enigmatic smile. "Go on now, before Mrs. Hendricks sends out a search party." The walk back to the boarding house was quick, the morning air fresh and clean after the storm. Zara steeled herself for Mrs. Hendricks's disapproval as she entered the front door, but to her surprise, the older woman simply looked up from her breakfast with an understanding expression. "There you are, dear. I was worried when you didn't come home last night, but then Mr. Porter stopped by to tell me you were sheltering at the livery during the storm." "Mr. Porter told you?" Zara asked, confused. Mrs. Hendricks nodded. "Said he was passing by just as the storm hit, and saw Blackwood bringing in the horses. Mentioned you were helping and would likely stay put until it passed." She patted Zara's hand. "Sensible decision. That was some storm." Relief washed over Zara. She would have to thank Porter the next time she saw him for his timely intervention, intentional or not. The day passed in a blur of activity, as she and Yates worked to repair minor damage from the storm. There was a new awareness between them, a current of anticipation that sparked whenever their hands brushed or their eyes met. By unspoken agreement, they maintained their usual professional demeanor, but Zara caught Yates watching her with a warmth that made her cheeks flush. Late in the afternoon, Yates announced he had an errand to run and left Zara to finish the day's work alone. He returned just before closing, a satisfied expression on his face. "Everything all right?" Zara asked as she swept the stable floor. "Better than all right," Yates replied. "I've made those arrangements I mentioned." Zara set down her broom. "Are you going to tell me what they are?" "Soon," Yates promised. "Very soon." The next day was Sunday. Zara dressed carefully for church, aware that her relationship with Yates, whatever it might be, was likely the subject of town gossip after the storm. As she walked to the church with Mrs. Hendricks, she noticed more than a few curious glances. Yates was already there when they arrived, looking uncommonly formal in a dark suit, his hair neatly combed. He greeted Mrs. Hendricks respectfully before turning to Zara with a smile that made her heart skip. "You look lovely," he said quietly. "Thank you," Zara replied, conscious of the eyes upon them. "You look very handsome yourself. Special occasion?" "The most special," Yates confirmed, offering her his arm. "Would you sit with me today?" The simple request sent a clear message to everyone watching. Yates Blackwood was openly courting Zara Westbrook. As they took their seats together near the front of the church, Zara heard the murmurs behind them but found she didn't care. Let them talk. For once in her life, she was exactly where she wanted to be. The service passed in a blur, Zara acutely aware of Yates beside her, his shoulder occasionally brushing hers as they stood for hymns. When the final blessing was given, he turned to her with an unexpectedly serious expression. "Would you take a walk with me?" he asked. "There's something I'd like to show you." Curious, Zara nodded. They made their way out of the church, nodding politely to the other parishioners, and set off down the main street of Willow Creek. To Zara's surprise, Yates led her toward the livery rather than the usual Sunday walking paths. "Why are we going to the stable?" she asked as they approached the familiar building. "You'll see," Yates replied, that enigmatic smile playing at his lips again. The stable was quiet, the horses fed and settled for their day of rest. Yates led Zara through to the back, toward his cabin, but instead of entering, he continued past it to a small clearing behind the building where a sapling oak had been planted. Next to the tree stood a new structure, the frame of a small house, its foundation solid, its walls partially raised. Building materials were stacked neatly nearby, waiting to be used. "Yates?" Zara questioned, taking in the scene with confusion. "I started it last month," he explained, watching her face. "I've been working on it in the evenings and early mornings. Porter and Bennett have been helping." "A house?" Zara asked, still not understanding. Yates took her hands in his expression earnest. "A home. For us if you want it." Understanding dawned, and Zara's heart began to race. "Are you asking?" "I'm asking you to marry me, Zara Westbrook," Yates said, his voice steady despite the vulnerability in his eyes. "I'm asking you to be my partner in every sense in the forge, in this home we'll build together, in life." Joy surged through Zara, so intense it brought tears to her eyes. "You want to marry me? Even though I'm too strong, too capable, too independent for most men's taste? I want to marry you because of those things, not despite them," Yates corrected her gently. "I don't want a wife who shrinks herself to make me feel bigger. I want a partner who stands tall beside me, who challenges me, who makes me better than I am alone." A tear spilled down Zara's cheek. "When I came west, I thought I was looking for security, for a practical arrangement with a man who needed a wife. I never imagined I would find this." "Neither did I," Yates admitted. "I had resigned myself to being alone. And then you walked into my stable, demanding a job, and turned everything upside down in the best possible way." Zara laughed through her tears. "I didn't exactly demand." "You absolutely did," Yates countered with a grin. "And I've been falling in love with you ever since." His expression grew serious again. "So, Zara Westbrook, will you marry me? Will you build this life with me, as equals?" "Yes," Zara said without hesitation, her heart full to bursting. "Yes, Yates Blackwood, I will marry you." Yates pulled her into his arms, his kiss conveying all the joy and promise of their future together. When they finally broke apart, both breathless and smiling, he gestured to the half-built house. "I thought we could finish it together," he said. "It seemed fitting." Zara surveyed the structure with a critical, professional eye. "The foundation looks solid. But I think we should extend that east wall to catch the morning sun." And perhaps add a small forge out back, so we can each have our own workspace when needed. Yates laughed, the sound full of delight. Already improving on my plans. This is exactly why I love you. And I love you. Zara replied, still marveling at how easily the words came. For seeing me exactly as I am and wanting me anyway. Not anyway. Yates corrected her, his arms tightening around her waist. Because of who you are. I wouldn't change a single thing about you, Zara Westbrook. News of their engagement spread through Willow Creek like wildfire. There were those who disapproved, of course Gerald Mitchell chief among them, but to Zara's surprise many more offered congratulations. Clara Bennett declared it the most sensible match this town has seen in years. And even Mrs. Hendricks seemed pleased, though she insisted on a proper church wedding before Zara could move into the new house, finished or not. In the weeks that followed, Zara and Yates worked side by side, both at the forge and on their home. They set a wedding date for late September, giving them time to finish the house and make the necessary arrangements. It won't be anything fancy, Zara warned as they worked on the roof one afternoon. I don't have family to invite, and my dowry is nothing but my tools and whatever I've saved from my wages. Yates handed her another shingle. I don't need fancy. And your skills are worth more than any dowry. As the wedding day approached, Zara found unexpected support from the women of Willow Creek. Clara Bennett organized a quilting bee to make bedding for the new house. Mrs. Hendricks altered her best dress into a suitable wedding gown. Even Louisa Mitchell, now Louisa Parker, shyly contributed a handmade lace tablecloth as a peace offering. Every home needs something beautiful, she said when she delivered it to the boarding house. The night before the wedding, Zara stood in her room at Mrs. Hendricks's, looking at the simple white dress hanging on the wardrobe door. Tomorrow she would become Mrs. Yates Blackwood. The thought filled her with a joy she had never expected to find when she boarded that stagecoach months ago. She had come west seeking security and found strength instead, not just in herself, but in the love of a man who valued that strength, who saw it as complementary to his own rather than threatening. The wedding day dawned clear and bright, the Wyoming sky an endless blue overhead. The church was fuller than Zara had expected, with most of the town turning out to witness the unusual union of the female blacksmith and the man who'd given her a chance when no one else would. Zara walked down the aisle alone, her head held high, her eyes fixed on Yates waiting for her at the altar. He watched her approach with such naked adoration that she felt beautiful in a way no compliment had ever made her feel. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Yates kissed her with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes. As they turned to face the congregation, hands joined, Zara caught sight of Gerald Mitchell slipping out the back of the church, his expression unreadable. She felt a momentary pang of sympathy for him, for all the men who would never know the joy of loving a woman in her full strength. The celebration afterward was held in the town hall, with tables laden with food contributed by nearly every household in Willow Creek. There was dancing and laughter, and when Yates led Zara onto the floor for their first dance as husband and wife, she moved with a confidence she hadn't felt at that first town dance months ago. Happy, Mrs. Blackwood? Yates asked, his voice low in her ear. Happier than I ever imagined possible, Mr. Blackwood, Zara replied, squeezing his hand. As the sun began to set, they slipped away from the celebration, walking hand in hand to their new home. It wasn't completely finished, there were still windows to install and interior walls to plaster, but the roof was sound. The main room was furnished with a bed, table, and chairs, and the small stove in the corner gave off a welcoming warmth. Welcome home, Yates said, lifting Zara over the threshold with an ease that made her laugh. Our home, she marveled, taking in the space they had built together. Later, as they lay together in the quiet darkness of their first night as husband and wife, Zara traced the lines of Yates's face with gentle fingers. Thank you, she whispered. For what? He asked, capturing her hand and pressing a kiss to her palm. For seeing me. The real me. For never asking me to be less than I am. Yates gathered her closer, his arms strong and secure around her. "I should be thanking you for bringing life and light back into my world. For being exactly who you are." Outside, the Wyoming wind whispered through the tall grass, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its mate. But within the walls of the small house they had built together, Zara Westbrook Blackwood felt something she had searched for all her life without knowing it, the profound peace of being truly, completely accepted. Winter came early that year, blanketing Willow Creek in snow before November's end. The house was finished just in time, the last of the interior walls plastered and painted before the first serious storm hit. Zara and Yates settled into a rhythm of life together, working side by side at the forge during the day, returning to their cozy home in the evenings. They had expanded the livery business, with Zara taking on more of the delicate metalwork that required precision rather than brute strength, while Yates handled the heavier tasks. Their partnership became a model of efficiency that impressed even their initial skeptics. By Christmas, Blackwood and Westbrook had customers coming from as far as Cheyenne. On Christmas Eve, as they sat before the fire in their small front room, Yates handed Zara a carefully wrapped package. "What's this?" she asked, surprised. They had agreed to keep the holiday simple, with just a special meal and perhaps a small gift each. "Open it and see," Yates encouraged, a boyish excitement in his eyes that made him look younger than his 30 years. Zara unwrapped the package to find a set of blacksmith's tools unlike any she had ever seen, smaller than standard, with handles carved to fit a woman's grip. "I designed them myself," Yates explained as Zara examined them with wonder. "Had them made in Denver. Figured if we're going to be partners properly, you should have tools made for your hands." Tears pricked at Zara's eyes. It was the most thoughtful gift she had ever received, in acknowledgement of both her skill and her physical difference from male blacksmiths, not as a liability, but as something to be accommodated and celebrated. "They're perfect," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you." "There's something else," Yates said, his expression turning more serious. "Something I want to discuss with you." Zara set the tools aside, giving him her full attention. "What is it?" "I've been thinking about the future," Yates began, taking her hand in his. "About our future. About children." Zara's heart quickened. They had talked about children in general terms before their marriage, both agreeing they wanted a family someday, but neither had broached the subject in the months since. "I've been thinking about that too," she admitted. Yates's thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. "I want you to know that whenever you're ready, if you're ready, I'll support whatever arrangements we need to make for the business. If you want to keep working, we'll find a way to make that possible." "You wouldn't expect me to give up the forge?" Zara asked, though she already knew the answer. Yates shook his head firmly. "Never. Your skill is too valuable to waste. And more importantly, it's part of who you are. I would never ask you to set that aside." Zara's heart swelled with love for this man who continued to surprise her with his understanding. "As it happens," she said softly, "we may need to discuss those arrangements sooner rather than later." Yates's brow furrowed in confusion, and then his eyes widened as understanding dawned. "Zara? Are you saying?" She nodded, a smile spreading across her face. "I'm fairly certain. Dr. Harrison confirmed it last week when I stopped by for that cut on my hand." Joy and wonder transformed Yates's face. "A baby," he breathed, his hand moving to rest gently on her still flat stomach. "Our baby. Due in early summer, according to the doctor," Zara confirmed. "I was waiting for the right moment to tell you." Yates gathered her into his arms, his kiss conveying all the emotion words couldn't express. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "You'll be an amazing mother," he said with absolute conviction. "And you'll be a wonderful father," Zara replied. "Our child will grow up knowing they can be anything, do anything, regardless of whether they're a boy or girl. Just like their mother," Yates agreed. "Strong, capable, and utterly loved for exactly who they are." As the fire crackled in the hearth and snow fell gently outside their window, Zara Westbrook Blackwood felt a contentment she had never dared to imagine for herself. She had traveled west seeking security and found something far more precious, a love that celebrated her strength rather than fearing it, a partner who stood beside her rather than above her, and a future bright with possibility. Summer arrived with long, golden days and the sweet scent of wildflowers carried on warm breezes. Zara's pregnancy progressed without complications, though she reluctantly reduced her hours at the forge as her due date approached. Yates hired a young man from town to help with the heavier work, but insisted that all the delicate pieces still be handled by the master craftsman of the family, as he had taken to calling Zara. On a brilliant July morning, with sunlight streaming through the bedroom window, Zara Blackwood gave birth to a daughter. After hours of labor during which she displayed the same strength and determination that characterized everything she did, Zara held her child in her arms, overwhelmed by a love fiercer than anything she had ever known. "She's perfect," Yates whispered, perched on the edge of the bed, his finger caught in the tiny grasp of his daughter. "She's strong," Zara replied with a tired smile. "Feel her grip." Yates laughed softly. "Like mother, like daughter. What shall we name her?" They had discussed names but hadn't settled on one, wanting to meet their child first. Looking down at the tiny face, with its shock of dark hair and eyes that promised to be as blue as her father's, Zara knew. "Eleanor," she said. "After my mother. Eleanor Claire Blackwood." "It's beautiful," Yates agreed, pressing a gentle kiss to first his daughter's forehead then his wife's. "She's beautiful. You're beautiful. I'm the luckiest man in Wyoming Territory." Eleanor Claire Blackwood grew into a curious, active child with her father's blue eyes and her mother's determined spirit. By the time she was 3, she was a familiar sight around the livery, perched on a specially built stool, watching her parents work with solemn concentration. "Mama makes pretty things," she announced to a customer one day. "Papa makes big things. I'm going to make both when I'm big." Zara and Yates exchanged smiles over their daughter's head, both remembering the day Gerald Mitchell had rejected Zara for being too strong. How different their lives would have been if Mitchell had been less of a fool, if Zara had found a husband who wanted her to shrink rather than shine. Over the years, Willow Creek grew from a small frontier town into a thriving community. The railroad came through in 1885, bringing new opportunities and challenges. Blackwood and Westbrook's smithy expanded to meet the increased demand, eventually moving to a larger location on the main street, with 3 apprentices working under Zara and Yates's supervision. Eleanor was joined by a brother, James, when she was 5, and another sister, Margaret, 3 years later. All 3 children grew up knowing they could be anything they wanted to be, watching their parents work as equal partners both in business and at home. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Yates surprised Zara with a small gathering of friends at their home now expanded to accommodate their growing family. Clara and Daniel Bennett were there, along with Mrs. Hendricks, who refused to be called anything but Mrs., despite her advanced age, and several other friends they had made over the years. After dinner, as twilight painted the sky in shades of purple and gold, Yates pulled Zara aside to the small garden they had planted together during their first spring as husband and wife. "I have something for you," he said, pulling a small package from his pocket. Inside was a delicate silver pendant in the shape of an anvil, with their initials entwined on one side. "It's beautiful," Zara said as Yates fastened it around her neck. "I made it myself," he admitted. "Took me 3 tries to get it right. Delicate work is still your domain." Zara touched the pendant, deeply moved by the symbolism the anvil that represented their shared craft, their livelihood, the foundation of the life they had built together. 10 years, she marveled. "Sometimes I can hardly believe it." "Best 10 years of my life," Yates said, drawing her into his arms. "And I'm looking forward to at least 50 more." Zara laughed. "That would make us ancient." "I plan to grow very old with you, Zara Blackwood," Yates replied, suddenly serious. To see our grandchildren learn to work the forge if they want, or become doctors or teachers or whatever else they dream of. As long as we're together, Zara said softly, I'll count myself blessed. As they stood in their garden, the sound of their children's laughter drifting through the open window, Zara reflected on the journey that had brought her here. The scared but determined young woman who had stepped off that stagecoach seemed like a distant memory now, though Zara knew she still carried that woman's strength within her. She had come west seeking a husband and found a partner instead. She had expected to make herself smaller to fit a man's expectations and discovered one who celebrated her exactly as she was. What are you thinking about? Yates asked, noticing her thoughtful expression. About how sometimes the best things in life come from our greatest disappointments, Zara replied. If Gerald Mitchell hadn't rejected me for being too strong, I might never have found you. Yates smiled, the same smile that still made her heart skip after all these years. Then I owe Mitchell a debt of gratitude. His loss was my immeasurable gain. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Yates pulled Zara close for a kiss that held all the passion and tenderness of their first, yet was somehow deeper, richer for the years they had shared. I love you, Zara Blackwood, he whispered against her lips. Every strong, brilliant, amazing inch of you. And I love you, Yates Blackwood, she replied, for never asking me to be anything but exactly who I am. Hand in hand, they returned to their home, to their children, to the life they had forged together as strong and enduring as the finest steel, tempered by challenges, shaped by love, and all the more beautiful for it.